We've been partnering with the United States on a number of issues. Years ago, we would not discuss issues in public. A lot of that was done in private. Now we're discussing issues in public. Our alliance and our work together in the war on terror, for instance. Before, we would be discussing this privately. Now we're upfront for what we're doing, in terms of the outlawing of funneling of money for terrorists or suspects. The fatwa that was just issued last week or the week before by our highest religious authority, restating their condemnation of funding for evildoers. The support of trying to call for the establishment of information center on the exchange of information on terrorism and terrorist activities, because the way to fight terrorism is the knowledge. What are they up to? Who is who? What are they doing? The exchange of ideas. When you have an act of terrorism that happens, and in your country you want to make sure the others know the new technology. When the assassination attempt on our head of our counterterrorism in Saudi Arabia took place, everybody was surprised of how it happened. How was it the explosion? He went through detectors, nobody found out about it, and it wasn't until later, through analysis, there wasn't much left of the guy. But through analyzing later, we found out what the explosive was, how it did, and it was in his underwear. Thus, the underwear bomber comes back later. That knowledge sort of would help people understand what's to expect in these ideas. The sharing of information on investments in terms of what's going on. You need to be more transparent. Is somebody selling you a package deal that it sort of looks good on the surface and it's going to be bad? Because we're so interrelated to each other that if one economy goes, a lot of them will follow. The U.S. being the largest economy, when it started having its turn down about a year ago, the world followed. Now you have the world worried about Greece. It's that knowledge that we are interrelated and we have to be able to work together. We are no longer an island that people in Saudi Arabia perceived us to be. In the old days, people used to say, you know what, I don't care what the world says, I'm sitting here, it's not going to affect me. Guess what? It does. When you use your banking, it goes through 4 or 5 different banks. When you use your phone system, it does go through satellites that are connected. If you're watching your television, it beams somewhere. So all what you're doing, we can no longer sort of pretend we're living in isolation. And when people talk to each other, it's no longer the idea, you know what, I'm going to be on this TV station and nobody else can hear me. The idea that politicians anywhere in the world can sort of talk to the local community in one way and to the world another is gone. Before you finish your sentence, what you said is already on the web. People know what you said. I was just watching Ron Paul trying to explain his statement today and what he's been saying, and you sit there thinking, you know what, 20 years ago nobody would have noticed that. Now it's sort of constantly updated, and the statements coming out, and the statements that are distributed, those are part of the technology. We're no longer isolated. And we need to expand our views to the world in terms of who we are in Saudi Arabia. Yes, we have extremists. We are not denying that. But are we dealing with it? How are we dealing with it? Needs to be told as well. Not every issue that is discussed or that reaches the American media has been discussed in the Saudi press weeks before that gets into discussion. Women's issue, the issue of religion, the issue of child care, the issue of homosexuality, the issues that were taboos in the past are being discussed. The issue of the religious establishment and their role in Saudi society is being discussed. Before it wasn't, but those are being discussed. The issue of women and the issue of foreign labor force in the country and the treatment of foreign labor force in Saudi Arabia. And those who have followed Saudi Arabia in the past would be surprised of what's going on in terms of the debate in the public, in the media. Some of it on websites, some of them are just in the print media, but it is a vibrant debate. We don't think alike when it comes to the idea. And there's a public opinion in Saudi Arabia that is measured in terms of actions and in terms of where we're going, in terms of reaction. When you look at the flooding that happened, the torrential rains that happened in Jeddah a few months ago, that killed about 100+ people, there was a major outcry. Investigations are taking place, and a number of officials are going to be held accountable for it. People are demanding change. People are demanding officials to be held accountable for their actions. And those are now loud. It's always been countered, but slow and quiet. But because we don't have the protests that you see in countries where people march and burn things and riot, we're much more subtle than that. We tend to have our own ways to discuss and make the message heard through the majlis, the open house, or meeting with officials. But those are ways that we can get our voices heard. And that has worked well for us in the past. And hopefully it will continue to be that approach, rather than looking at our neighbors and seeing the problems we're facing in Yemen and the problems we're facing in Iraq and the problems we're facing in Somalia. And you look at problems that are in the neighborhood, and you're saying, you know, we live in a tough neighborhood. And my suggestion years ago was the old Soviet Navy had this big aircraft carrier for $1 billion. They didn't know what to do with it. Nice, put it by the Red Sea. They have a problem, pick up, and we move. But it doesn't work that way. We're stuck in our neighborhood that we have to deal with a crisis where we need allies. One of the biggest problems that we face in our region, and it's in every problem in the Middle East, whether it's a legitimate problem or whether it is being used by extremists, is the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Bush administration understood it at the end. President Obama understands that this needs to be solved, because you take the wind out of the sail of the extremists that are in and that are using the crisis for their advantage. When we take that out of their sail, the winds, we can move forward. And that's the goal that we work with the Americans, and we've been working with the Arab League. King Abdullah presented his peace initiative many years ago, and it's still on the table in terms of let's move forward. The sad thing about the Arab-Israeli conflict is everybody knows what it looks like. Let's get to it and move forward. But in terms of negotiating and sort of dragging your feet, it does not work. And we've always, let's get to the peace process and then settle the other issues later. But let's get moving. That confidence-building aspect of it for a long time didn't work. It gives extremists on both sides veto power. It gives Hamas and those who are opposed to when Arafat was in power to undermine it. It gives extremists in the Likud party to undermine it. For the Israelis, simple: announce the construction of new settlements. That will put a stop on the peace process. On the Palestinian side, it's an act of violence. That puts a stop on it. It doesn't have to be major one, just enough to slow the process down. The other issue that we're dealing with is the crisis in Yemen, that we're working with the Americans about it. Yemen is a serious problem that we face that needs to be dealt with. We look at Yemen, where it has a problem in the north with the Houthis. It has a problem in the south with the secessionists now. It has serious economic problems that it needs to deal with. Add to it some 700,000 Somali refugees that come across. How many of those Somali refugees that are coming across are members of extremist groups? How many of those are going to be a problem for us? And how many of them are using Yemen because it's only a short distance to travel to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and beyond? Yemen cannot be a failed state. It is not a failed state. But we need to invest heavily into it. Yemen is one of those countries that we have always talked to our friends that do not forget about it. After the Soviet collapse, people forgot about Afghanistan. We look at Yemen and said, we shouldn't do that. It's important. And first of all, it's right next to us on the border, and we cannot forget about it. It's important to us. It's important to the region. And there is an understanding in terms of trying to help Yemen develop and help it go beyond its current economic crisis. And the root cause of Yemen right now is the economic problems. The government does not have the resources to provide the services. Unlike Afghanistan, it does have an infrastructure that needs to be developed, but that's another crisis that we have to deal with in our area that we're working with.